I have listened to you, and many wanted the continuation of this story. That is why during all this time, I have been organizing and studying all the logs that Carmen wrote. From this process, I have discovered something extremely interesting. Carmen's occult life can be divided into 5 phases. These phases range from the discovery of the paranormal to its complete domination, which resulted in the most terrifying ghosts lurking around that house and causing one of the most terrifying experiences in Carlos' life. In this video, you will see 15 new photos that describe what Carmen's descent into darkness was like. Photos that will probably leave you with the worst nightmares. So stay, because what you're going to see will surely shake you. My name is Leonore Clay, and this is The Darkest Secret. Today we present The Old Woman Who Lived with 92 Ghosts, Part 3. There have already been 2 videos that we have dedicated to this spectacular story, so if you haven't seen the previous parts, please go and watch them, because in this video I reference a lot of what was said in those videos. Carmen's story is very well detailed and contains many dates. An order is necessary to understand what she was trying to do with this information. As a summary, in the first video, I told you about the house and how Carlos found that briefcase that contained documents and photos with the most incredible paranormal evidence I have ever seen. In the second video, we revealed that this was not a random story. Carmen had been quite meticulous when she was presented with this new reality about the paranormal. She decided to keep a set of specific logs that contained every detail of each session. I also showed you the pictures of the email that Carlos sent to us. Dozens of organized files whose interior kept the photos and logs corresponding to each event. Because I have never received a case with so much information. Our second video was too dense, very technical, and full of material, so I decided to put this video together in a different way. As I mentioned in the intro, I have grouped all the information from Carmen's logs and her time in the occult into 5 phases, and in the following videos of this series, I will show you this complete and creepy story that twists more every time. Therefore, I welcome you to the first phase. I determined this phase based on the fact that most of the ghosts here were passive, generally not attacking or coming into contact with the attendants. The shapes were visible. They took the photos, but there was no further contact either during the sessions or after them. Now, there is one thing that I would like to emphasize, and that is the quality of detail in Carmen's descriptions. It shows that she was investigating this phenomena in an extremely professional manner, and just as it would happen to any logical and skeptical person of the paranormal, if you put yourself in Carmen's shoes and experience the real paranormal for the first time, you would probably also want to find an explanation or discover how these phenomena occur. In a couple of writings on the back of Carmen's logs, she expresses her intention to make a contribution to science with this. She intended to study it, to publish it in some way. There were 15 written logs that I managed to categorize in the discovery phase. From what we can conclude, in this phase, Carmen was trying to define a contact process and find the reason or explanation for how and why these manifestations occur. It was partly due to her and her creativity, which allowed them to discover many other ghosts, several new ones, that you will meet in this video. Let's start with the ones you already know. The girl, as described in the logs, was a frequent remnant. Carmen describes her as a girl younger than 7 years old, but who sometimes changes her appearance. That was the strangest thing. They seemed to be different girls, but the triggering object was always the same. Therefore, Carlos's grandmother concluded that the same spectrum can take on relatively similar forms, but it could be in a different texture, different appearance, with all or none of their limbs visible, as if manifestation was difficult for them. It seemed, and I quote Carmen, a diffuse memory of her appearance, as if the ghosts themselves had to remember what they looked like, and that was how they presented themselves. However, there were always details that allowed us to say who it was. For example, in the case of the girl, her dress was always black. That was the indication that it was her. But sometimes her hair was blonde, other times brown, sometimes long, and other times absent. There were times she appeared with an object in her hands, such as a stuffed animal, identical to the one used as the trigger object. Everyone present, except Maria, used to follow her. The first appearances were unusual for most. They caused enormous fear in the attendees. However, as the days went by, it became common, and after the 4th session, they even played secretly with her. At least that's how Carmen describes it in her logs. The girl showed up and appeared running from one room to another, and they all went there to chase her. This is how they took several of these photographs. Carlos tells me that at least he does not remember any interaction with this being. He never saw her or the stuffed animal, and due to her description and the things that the assistants experienced with the girl's ghost, he doubts that it was she who pulled his shirt on that occasion. He is more inclined to believe that it is another entity that you will meet in the breakup phase. Now, let's move on to the next already known spectrum. This is one of the most mysterious beings of the discovery phase. It first appeared after they used one of Maribel's toys, Carmen's daughter, as a trigger object. He first manifested himself with his footprints, bare feet stomping on the floor like an angry father heading to his son's room to punish him. This is how Carmen described it. It was not until his manifestation was complete that the group broke up for the first time. After this photo was taken, Carmen reports that Cristina Escalante leaves the group due to terror because the sessions where this man appeared was very macabre. The first time it manifested itself physically, it released a horrible, rotten odor. Then those loud footsteps were heard that moved erratically until little by little, its presence began to become visible. The stench was putrid, but its appearance was worse. Unlike the girl, this specter looked worn down. His torso was bare, and it looked clearly corroded and damaged, as if it were literally a body that had been dead for years. Something purple with a swollen figure that looked like plastic. Maria tried to get rid of this invocation. She extinguished the candles, put away the triggering object, and even though the man seemed not to see them or ignore them, he still walked around the house as if furious. It was too stressful for them. Cristina had to leave the house accompanied by Susana and Valentina. Only Maria and Idulia, who took the photos, and Carmen stayed in the house to understand the specter. Everywhere it passed, it left a cold air, and according to Idulia, it was not reflected in the mirrors. Suddenly, he made a turn, entered the kitchen, and vanished. The next day, Christina reported that she could no longer attend the meetings, that doing this was against Christ. The spectrums that came out of the objects were becoming more and more alarming, feeling wrong, and it was already beginning to terrify her greatly. The other members respected her decision, but still they did not stop with the invocations, concluding that perhaps he remembers himself corroded, that maybe that was not his form, but it was the memory that he had of himself. Soon they met again. It took work, of course, because after the fat man's invocation, Maria stopped participating. It is assumed that her gift was focused on helping people, not satisfying the curiosity of a bunch of young girls. Carmen had the gift of words and conviction. Somehow they kept Maria with them for a longer time. Carlos suspects that there was money involved. That was the way in which Carmen always handled things. On this occasion, the spectrum was invoked thanks to a very old object presented by Edulia. It was a set of cutlery that had a very deep history of many owners, almost 100 years back. They spent quite a while trying to summon whatever was from each of these cutlery without success, until suddenly they start to see this. Sometimes she appeared alone, other times she appeared accompanied. The group defined this set of specters as the family. Several specters generally appeared at the same time, what the group called the mother and her children, but could very well be a sister. It couldn't be clearly distinguished. The ghosts had an intermittent quality, that is, they appeared standing, staring at the group, which is when they took advantage of taking photos. According to Carmen's description, their appearance was like a slow flash. They appeared like a photo in one place and faded away without moving as quickly as they appeared. Completely passive, but something strange happened with the family. Carmen wrote that a few days later, the figure of what seemed to be the mother began to lurk around the house. She tried to take photos, but she had a hard time capturing the perfect moment. Of all the times, it appeared that this is the only photo she managed to capture during the day. Do you know what the creepiest thing is? Carlos does not remember seeing this woman, but his mother, Maribel, does. Until she was 9 years old, she thought it was an aunt. Several times she saw her walking out of her room at night, and when she asked her mother who she was, she told her, "She's your Aunt Clara." She even remembers that a couple of times in the early morning, she felt her sit at the foot of her bed. She felt the mattress sink. She knew it wasn't her mother because this woman came in without saying a word. She already knew the sound of her steps, even though she had never done anything to Maribel. Something inside her knew that there was something strange about this aunt. Whenever she came into her room, an enormous fear was unleashed in her chest. She preferred to pretend to be asleep. On the other hand, she didn't like being separated from her mother, but neither did she like living in this house. Sometimes she appreciated spending more time with her aunt than with her mother, and perhaps these were Carmen's reasons. Consider that Maribel was a baby during these initial sessions. Therefore, the specter haunted the house for at least 8 years. Something very creepy to think about. After Cristina left, Susana and Valentina also left the group. They did so shortly after the family was summoned. The idea that they were releasing specters that can lurk and summon themselves terrified them. Carmen writes, "They are cowards." She adds that the members are better off without them, and that the purpose of the group is to be able to interact with them and ask them about their nature and the afterlife. That was the objective of the group. an objective that had to be achieved at all costs. And if they were not in tune with it, then they were better off that way. Then Carmen indicates that she convinced the others, Edulia and Maria, to study occultism to see if those types of books contain the answers to how to make invocations able to emit words. That was how they summoned the next spectre of this phase. This is another interesting spectrum that I have managed to occupy in the discovery phase. This was the first spectre to begin appearing outside the walls of the home. Every time he was summoned, he used to look at the group, first from outside the home. Carmen described him as a young, well-dressed man of perhaps 35 years old. The features of his face were seldom visible. This spectre is unlike all the others. It seemed to fear the members. Every time they tried to get close to him, he ran away. He walked quickly through the home, looking for an exit. They quickly lost contact with it. It was the spectrum that manifested the shortest time. He appeared, walked quickly, and vanished almost in less than 30 seconds, as Carmen describes it. Maria had to invoke it with Carmen, while Edulia positioned herself with the camera near the last place where it was seen. It was with this spectrum that they concluded that all the demonstrations would behave differently. Despite how briefly it stayed with them, invoking it almost always had an effect. It is the only spectre among all those they summoned that manifested with a 92% probability. Maria theorized that his connection with the triggering object was what caused it. The success rate was so great that they tested if they could invoke it during the day. Up to this point, they had failed in that. Everyone manifested at night, except the woman from the family, who managed to show herself alone without needing to be called. The result of these experiments is this pair of photographs. He manifested quickly, but did not interact. The group would continue the following week. Invoking the same spectrum seemed pointless, especially now that they handled the technique better. That's why they insisted on all kinds of triggering objects, especially the oldest objects they could find. There was a relationship between the antique object and its ability to harbor specters. This is how they got this old metal plate. There is only one photo of this invocation. With amazement, Carmen writes, "Incredible how this old woman can even attract dogs." I assume that she was referring to Maria. According to the log, the demonstration began with the characteristic sound of a dog's paws trotting towards you from another side of the house. It is assumed that they took several photographs of the 17 mentioned in the log. Only 5 were inside of the briefcase. They took several during the day and several at night. This is one of the daytime ones. In fact, this looks more like an animal. But this other one was taken at night. I don't know. It looks like it's upright. At least Carmen wrote that it was a dog. But does he look like a dog to you? Note its size. Under this photo, Carmen admits that it caused her enormous fear. The animal approached slowly from the hallway of that door, and when it reached the light, it began to straighten up. Edulia quickly took the photo, while Maria tried to close the invocation out of fear, saying it was a demon. According to Carmen, in the log, the being stood up until it was on 2 legs and measured at least 2 meters. Carmen writes, "This remnant is the living example of my theory. Beings manifest in the way they remember themselves. The last recollection of how they were, of the scene that they assume to possess. Therefore, following this line of thought, this dog could have been a house dog. His way of seeing himself may be similar to that of a human. Perhaps he never saw himself as a dog. This theory would explain many things. It would even explain the monsters that have been seen around for centuries. In this session, Carmen complains again to the group their cowardice of wanting to finish the invocation as a result of fear. She details that Edulia and Maria were so terrified that they aggressively yelled at her to get away from the animal. Carmen was in front of this thing when those screams occurred. Let's move on to the next spectrum since it relates directly to this idea. If we continue to think that ghosts manifest depending on their latest perception of themselves, what does this mean? Do you notice what is true? Carmen describes them as enormous and strange spiders that began to appear from between the walls, the recesses of the floor, behind the curtains, etc. Instead of ghosts, spiders began to walk on the furniture. In this particular image, Carmen writes that Edulia managed to kill one, which broke in half. And in the image, she shows it held between two knitting sticks. They had red and black legs. Its head was strange. Carmen had never seen this type of spider in her house. And yes, as you could tell, it was not a ghost. They were physical spiders. It couldn't be a coincidence, since they only came out when they tried to summon the ghost of a woman using one of her old rings. Why spiders? What does that mean? Carlos tells us that there were only 2 photos in the briefcase. Before starting with the details of this log, Carmen makes a note in one of the margins of the page, saying, "Again the lady appeared to me in front of Maribel. I found her in front of her crib. Maybe we could include her in our sessions. Ask Maria." Despite this information, there is no evidence to show that Maribel participated in the sessions at any time, nor does she remember it. She only feels hatred towards her mother now that she knows all these things, especially because of what you will discover later. Let's go directly to the session. From the date of the document, it is understood that after the spider session, the group did not meet again until 5 months later. The reason is not explained, but when they returned, they invoked an entity they called legs. The description of this spectrum indicates that this is all that was manifested of this being, not because it did not have the rest of its body, but because every photograph they took only showed its legs. They took a surprising 200 photos of this specter, but its figure was only captured in some of them. This was one of those spectrums invisible to the human eye, but for some reason the camera can capture it. Carmen writes, "The reason why some specters seem invisible to us but are seen in photographs are due to the intermittency of their existence. They appear for such a brief moment that the human eye cannot capture it." Listen so you can understand what was happening with this thing. When they began an invocation, they knew if it had worked or not because of Maria's signals. She felt exhausted and her breathing accelerated. Although they did not see or were not close to the spectrums in the home, she seemed to perceive their presence. She used to say, "It's here," so that is how they went out to look for the specter. On this occasion, they could not find it. They spent several hours searching for it until they discovered that in each invocation, the being simply stayed still in the same place. They discovered this because of the marks it left on the carpet. It doesn't detail what type of marks they were, just that that's how they knew it was there. Godman writes that when they discovered the footprints after the 5th session of the spectrum, they began to take photographs, but they did not capture anything. They thought it would be an invisible spectrum. However, the footprints did not move. They could stay in the same place for hours. Therefore, they began to take several photos, one after another, until suddenly they began to appear. The more photos they took, the more frequently the results appeared. It was here that Godman concluded that this spectrum appears and disappears faster than the human eye can capture, intermittently and with a seemingly random frequency. I was researching this, and it turns out that from a scientific point of view, there is some truth to this theory, and it has to do with the term called retinal persistence. I can't guarantee this 100%, and it would be great if someone in the audience could corroborate this information. But what I found, retinal persistence is a phenomenon whereby an image remains on the retina of the eye for a short time after the source of that image has disappeared. Generally, this time is about 0.0625 to 0.05 seconds. If an object appears and disappears in less time than this, or between that interval, it is unlikely to be captured by human vision. Older cameras, including those from the time of these sessions, had a shutter speed 0.001 seconds, meaning they could indeed capture images that would go unnoticed by the human eye. Another important detail is that Godman assures that there was a greater chance of success if they pointed directly at the marks that this spectrum left on the floor, which is why all the images appear like this, pointing towards the floor. Do you notice that in no photo can you see his hands? Also, don't you think his body's strange? Look at these photos. Do you notice anything they have in common? Godman writes that they tried to maintain a slightly higher angle to see if the body could be seen completely. But no, not even the hands could be seen. Its waist seemed to be extended upwards, to never appear on the camera. Look at this. Its waist extends several centimeters above the furniture. Its anatomy is extremely strange. Why does this happen? In the documents, Godman does not indicate a theory as to why the rest of the body does not want to appear. Can you come up with any theories? Consider the most important information of this phase. The ghosts manifest themselves considering their last perception of themselves. What must this woman have been to only represent herself as a pair of legs? Could it be that this was the last thing she saw of her body? I read you in the comments. I have limited myself to expressing my personal opinion in each of the photos so that you can conclude for yourself. For this video, I consider that showing the information as flat and raw as possible regarding the resources gives a better experience of it. That way you can also get as close as possible to feeling the same experience that I felt when reading each of the logs for the first time and comparing them to their images. There were still a few more spectra to see in the discovery phase. During this week, I will release a survey in our community tab to find out if you want to continue to the next phase or meet using the same format the rest of the spectrums that remain in this category. During this week, I will release a survey in our community tab to find out if you want to continue to the next phase or meet using this same format the rest of the spectrums that remain in this category. I hope you liked this video because my name is Leonore Clay and this was the Darkest Secret